talking about, well, waiting on God.
Hmm.
And I know that can be a really tough one. It's something we all face in different seasons of life. And, it's not always easy to kind of navigate those waters.
Yeah.
So we've got some really rich material to dive into today. Specifically, you sent over Temple's Table, Waiting on God, Ep47.AV.
Hmm.
I think this is going to be a good one to really unpack together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just that feeling of waiting on God can be so difficult. And for some people it's almost impossible. Like how can we wait on God when I need answers now
Yeah.
or I need provision now?
Right. It's like that internal cry of like, how long, Lord? How long?
Yeah.
When is this going to happen? So I think our mission today is to really explore this whole concept of waiting. What does it look like? What does Scripture tell us about it?
Yeah.
And how can we really cultivate that strength and that rest and that hope that comes from waiting on God?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's presented in these scriptures as much more than just like a passive pause. Like it's not just,
Yeah.
sit back and do nothing. It's a very active and dynamic process.
Yeah.
So let's jump in. You've highlighted some really great scriptures here, and I think a great place to start is Psalms 27.1 thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is a great place to start. Psalms 27.14 says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord."
Okay, so right off the bat, you're hit with this command, right? Wait for the Lord. But then it's interesting because it doesn't just stop there. It says, be strong and take heart. And then again, it says, wait for the Lord.
Right.
What do you make of that? Like that repetition, but also that kind of like injection of strength in the middle?
Yeah. I think it's definitely not a simple, just sit there and be patient type of thing. It's an active stance. Like,
Right.
Be strong, take heart. You're going to have to do some things. You're going to have to, work on yourself, to wait on the Lord. And I know the Temple Summary even pointed out that it's, just the thought of waiting on God for some people is just like, ooh, it's so difficult or it feels impossible.
It does.
And so I think that's what that verse is meeting you at. It's saying, be strong and take heart.
Yeah, like acknowledging that difficulty right from the start.
Yes.
And then saying, okay, but here's the antidote. Strength, courage found in the waiting, in the anticipation.
Yes.
Now you move on, and the material talks about finding rest in the wait
Mm-hmm.
and brings us to Psalms 62.5.
Yes. My soul find rest in God. My hope comes from him.
What a beautiful verse. And it's so interesting how it talks about finding rest. Like it's an active choice, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, my soul. You have to tell yourself to find rest in God. And I think that's the key, is that you have to make that choice because your hope comes from God.
So it's about shifting your focus from like the external circumstances, which may not be changing, to that internal choice to find your peace in God.
Exactly.
Because ultimately your hope is rooted in Him, not necessarily in the circumstances changing, right?
Right.
So we go from being told to be strong in the waiting to finding rest in God.
Yes.
And then you naturally progress to this idea of waiting with hope.
Yeah.
And you've highlighted Psalms 33.20 for this.
Right. We wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield.
I love that. Like it's a very expectant kind of waiting.
Yeah.
You're not just passively waiting. You're waiting with hope and expectation.
Yes. And I think that's a very key word is hope. Because, we have the Lord as our help and our shield. So while we're waiting, we know that he is there for us. He's going to help us through this time.
Yeah. And it's rooted in something solid, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
you said, He is our help. He is our shield.
Yeah.
So it's not this kind of flighty hope. It's a hope that's grounded in the character of God and His promises. And speaking of hope, Isaiah 40.31 paints a beautiful picture of the power of hoping in God. It says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." I mean, what powerful imagery.
Right. Soaring on wings like eagles. And I always ask myself, why eagles? Why not another bird?
Right. It's so specific.
Yeah, it's very specific. And I think it's because of the height that the eagles fly at. They can see so much more. They have a different perspective.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens when we wait on the Lord, is that we start to see things from his perspective.
And that perspective can be so renewing. Because you're right, eagles, they soar above the storms.
Yes.
They see the bigger picture. And so it's like when we wait on God, we're not just kind of stuck in the muck of our circumstances. We're lifted up. And we're given that fresh perspective that can renew our strength.
And I love how it also says that you'll run and not grow weary. You'll walk and not be fainted. That's a promise that even when we're in a season of waiting, we can still be moving forward. We can still be making progress.
Right. We're not meant to just, be completely stagnant. And I think that leads us to the next point that the material brings up, which is this Whole idea of God's appointed time. Habakkuk 2.3 says, "For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay."
Ooh, that's a good one. I think that speaks to that feeling we all get sometimes when we're waiting. Like, come on, God, how long is this going to take?
Exactly. We have our timelines,
Right.
our schedules. We want things to happen on our time. But God works on a different clock, doesn't he?
He does. He does. But it's reassuring to know that there is a specific time, a time that he has set, even if it feels like it's taking forever from our perspective.
It will come to pass. And I love that phrase in there, though it linger, wait for it. It acknowledges that feeling of like, oh, this is taking so long. But then it's followed by that reassurance. It will certainly come and will not delay.
So good.
So it's about trusting that God sees something we don't,
Yes.
that his timing is perfect, even if we don't understand it.
Yes. And speaking of trusting, we have Hebrews 10.23. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful.
That's such a powerful reminder that God is not flaky.
Hmm.
He doesn't forget his promises. He is faithful.
Yes, he is. He's not like us where, we say we're going to do something and then we forget or we change our minds.
Right.
God's promises are based on his character. He is faithful to his word.
So we can hold on to hope. We can wait with expectation, knowing that he will come through. Now, the material then kind of connects back to the temple summary and talks about the perfection of God's way in waiting. And brings in Psalms 18.30. As for God, his way is perfect. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him.
It makes sense because God is perfect.
Right.
So his ways are perfect.
His timing is perfect.
Yes. And even when we don't understand it, even when it doesn't make sense to us, we can trust that he knows what he's doing. And I know the temple summary even says that we have our plans and our schedules, but God has a much bigger picture in mind.
Right. A perfect picture.
Yeah.
So it's about surrendering our limited understanding to his infinite wisdom. And then we have that beautiful promise in there.
Yes.
He shields all who take refuge in him. So it's not just about enduring a difficult time. It's about finding safety and security in God's perfect plan.
Absolutely. And even though we're waiting on God and trusting in his timing and his plan, we can't just be sitting around doing nothing. We have Philippians 4.6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God.
I love that. Like
Right.
waiting doesn't equal inaction.
Right.
It's about consistently going to God in prayer, bringing our needs, our desires, our longings before him. And notice it says with thanksgiving.
Yes.
That's so important, isn't it? Even while we're waiting, we can still be thankful.
Absolutely, because when we focus on what we're thankful for, it shifts our perspective.
It does.
It reminds us of all the blessings God has already given us, and it strengthens our faith and our trust in him. And, during times of waiting, it's easy to let fear creep in. And that's what we see in Matthew 8.26. He replied, "You have little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm.
The story is so powerful because it shows that tension between fear and faith that we often experience.
Yes.
I mean, here are the disciples in the boat with Jesus, and yet they're terrified by the storm.
Right. And I think Jesus' question, "Why are you so afraid?" wasn't meant to be harsh. It was meant to point them back to their faith in him.
Yeah, like a gentle nudge to remember who they were with. And then, of course, he calms the storm, demonstrating his power over every circumstance, even the ones that feel really scary while we're waiting.
Absolutely. And the material brings in a great example of God's communication during a season of waiting in Genesis 15.4. Then the word of the Lord came to him. "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir."
This is such a beautiful illustration of God's faithfulness. Like Abraham had been waiting for this promised heir for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's in the midst of that waiting that God speaks, gives him that clear assurance about the future.
Yeah. And I think that's what we need to remember when we're waiting. God is still speaking. He's still guiding us. It may not always be in an audible voice, but he's there.
Right. It could be through his word,
Yeah.
through an inner prompting,
Yes.
or just that deep sense of peace that surpasses understanding. And that word that he speaks, that he gives us, is steadfast, it's reliable. Isaiah 46.10 says, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose.
Now that's a verse you can cling to when you're waiting on God, because it tells us that God's plans are unchanging.
Unwavering.
Yes. From the beginning of time, he's known the end.
So our waiting isn't random.
No.
It's not meaningless. It's part of his bigger plan.
Right.
And that's, he's in control. Finally, the material brings us to Proverbs 13.1. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life.
That's so true. It acknowledges the pain, the heartache that can come with waiting, when it feels like our hopes are constantly being delayed.
Yeah. But then it gives us that beautiful contrast. It says a longing fulfilled is a tree of life.
Yes.
So it's like that reminder that even though the waiting might be tough,
Yeah.
it leads to something beautiful, something fulfilling.
When it's God's timing.
When it's God's timing, it's that tree of life that brings nourishment and joy and satisfaction. So as we wrap up this deep dive into waiting on God, we've seen that it's not about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about actively trusting in God, finding our rest in Him,
Yes.
holding on to hope, clinging to His promises, and remembering that His ways are perfect. His timing is perfect,
Yeah.
and He is faithful.
And we can actively engage with God through prayer. Bring our requests to Him with thanksgiving, and we can combat fear with faith, remembering that He is in control, even in the midst of the storm. And His word is steadfast. His plans will be accomplished.
Absolutely. And the source material ends with this really comforting thought that even when we don't understand the delays or the reasons behind them, God has us.
Yes.
His perfect plan will be fulfilled. So here's a question for you listening today. How can you apply these principles to your own life? What are you waiting on God for? And how can you shift your perspective from anxiety and impatience to trust and rest and hope?
Waiting on God is not a punishment. It's an opportunity to grow closer to Him, to deepen our faith, and to see His faithfulness in new and amazing ways.
So beautiful. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I hope it's encouraged you and given you some practical tools to navigate those waiting seasons in your own life. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.